It's okay. I mean, it's Good evening. It is 6:01, and I'd like to call to order the October 11, 2023 Planning Commission meeting. We are in the Keizer Civic Center in Keizer, and Dawn has noted our attendance as I'm sitting there with my mic off after I literally just said, please make sure to turn your microphones on. All right, our second order of business tonight is something that's kind of exciting, is the swearing in of two new commissioners, Rob Witters and Fernando Lopez. And so what I'm going to ask you guys to do is please go down front, and then we'll ask Dawn to administer. Are you going to do it simultaneously?
No,
one at a time? Okay. So whoever wants to go first, we'll do the oath of, or the swearing in. So getting sworn in right now is going to be soon-to-be Commissioner Rob Witters.
Okay, Rob, will you please repeat after me and raise your right hand? I, Rob Witters, being first duly sworn,
I, Rob Keizer, being first duly sworn,
upon oath say
upon oath say,
that I will support the Constitution
I will support the Constitution
of the United States and
of the
the
United States and
Constitution of the State of Oregon,
the Constitution of the State of Oregon,
and that I will faithfully and impartially
and I will faithfully and impartially
discharge the duties of a planning commissioner
discharge the duties of the planning commissioner
for the city of Keizer
for the city of Keizer
according to the best of my ability
according to the best of my ability
for my term of office.
for my term of office.
Great, thank you.
All right. And then for the camera up next, and for the audience listening, the next will be our new Planning Commissioner, Mr. Fernando Lopez. And for those of you that are watching the camera right now, what's happening right now is the official signing of the documents. That has to happen so that Dawn can record that. And what's unique about the Planning Commission is it's one of only two bodies in the city of Keizer that actually go through an oath process, the other being the city council. The other cool part about that is we get to do an annual statement of economic interest. I don't know if that's cool, but it's just a fun little factoid. Lobbyists, politicians, and planning commissioners. And agency heads, I guess, as well, right?
Lobbyists don't do it.
Lobbyists don't do it?
No.
No. Thank you for the correction, Mr. Burson. If anybody know, it'd be you. Go ahead, please.
Okay, Fernando, will you please repeat after me? And you do have your right hand raised, thank you. I, Fernando Lopez,
I, Fernando Lopez,
being first duly sworn,
being first duly sworn,
upon oath say
upon oath say
that I will support
that I will support
the Constitution of the United
the
States
Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution
and the Constitution
of the State of Oregon,
of the State of Oregon,
and that I will faithfully
and I will faithfully
and impartially
and impartially
discharge the duties
discharge the duties
of a planning commissioner
of planning commissioner
for the city of Keizer
for the city of Keizer
according to the best of my ability
according to the best of my ability
for my term of office.
for my term of office.
Thank you.
All right. I'm trying to come up with more filler dialogue here, but I don't have anything. I mean, it seems good. It's either that or at some point the volume's not working.
You think people are watching?
Oh yeah, tens. Maybe 3.
Or
Dr. Jerry McGee always used to watch, and then he'd call me afterwards and say, all right, Mr. Lawyer, this is how you screwed things up. All right, well, congratulations. Thank you. Congratulations. Glad to have you on board. Next, why not? Why are you here? Let's go ahead, Commissioner Lopez. Why the Planning Commission? Why did you want to become a planning commissioner for the city of Keizer?
Yeah, so I wanted to have a better understanding how the city was going and where it's going. So I figured this was a great opportunity for me, and also to bring the lens that I can bring from my experience to this already looks amazing board. So that's why I'm here. You know,
Alright.
I have a family, so I want to make sure we love Keizer, so we want to be a part of it. And you know, my little kids, I want them to grow up here and know their dad, you know, did his part for the city. So
Great.
that's fine.
Well, we're glad to have you here.
Thank you.
Commissioner Witters, why? Why the Planning Commission? Because I know you were here for a little bit as the West Keizer Neighborhood Association liaison, and you just liked us so much you wanted to stick around.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I wanted to get the perspective from this angle. No, I've always been interested in planning type issues. My career outside of this building is as an appraiser. I work independently and also with Marion County, so I'm involved with real estate and planning decisions. I've always been following them, and I felt like I would have some, if I have a chance to contribute, and I would like to do so.
Great. Well, we're glad to have you on board. Any questions for our new commissioners, other commissioners? Any comments? No? All right. We'll move on to the election of chair and vice chair. So we'll open on the floor for nominations. Commissioner Gruns?
I nominate Matt Lawyer for chair and Sarah Hutches for vice chair.
Is there any additional nominations? Okay, we'll close nominations, and I guess since there's no, do we just need a, I always screw this up. Do we need a motion, or is it just a, yeah, okay. Let's do a motion. All right, so we have a nomination for Matt Lawyer as chair and Sarah Hutchins as vice chair. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll make the motion to approve Matt Lawyer for chair and Sarah Hutchins for vice chair.
Okay, we have a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner Witters and a second by Commissioner Grentz to have Matt Lawyer as chair and Sarah Hutchins as vice chair. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. All right, motion passes. I want to thank Commissioner Grentz for being vice chair. It's a rigorous role. Thank you. I always appreciated your sound advice and at least acknowledgement when I'm screwing things up, which is often.
It's a lot of pressure backing up the peanut gallery that you are.
That kind of hurt. I used to like you. I'm just kidding. I still do. All right, now we got approval of minutes or consideration of minutes, September 2023 regular session minutes. Can we get a motion on that, please?
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Grentz and a second by Commissioner Hutchins to approve the September minutes as presented. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. Motion passes unanimously, and we have one absent. And I forgot to note on the first motion, we had one absent, Commissioner Avisham. All right, appearance of interested citizens. I'd like to welcome up one of our former colleagues, Francisco Saldivar. Please come on up. And if you would be so kind, please state your name and city of residency for the record.
My name is Francisco Saldivar.
Check here.
My name is Francisco Saldivar. I live at 5392 Newburgh Drive here in Keizer. I just wanted to, I didn't get a chance over the summer break or anything like that to express my gratitude for serving with many of you on the Planning Commission. It is a great body. For the two, Rob and Fernando, you're going to have a great time being a part of the city and how it grows and develops. There's a lot of good work that goes on with the Planning Commission. And you're in good hands with Shane as the director. He'll steer you and give you a lot of advice and answer all your questions. So it was a good time. And I just want to thank all of you for the hard work you've done. And I did have a really good time serving on the commission with all of you there. Anyway, that's it. Just keep up the good work. And, you know, I either will be watching on TV or sitting in the cheap seats there paying attention to what's going on. All right. That's it. Thank you.
Well, I just want to say thank you for your time and the expertise you brought to this body. I think you helped contribute to a lot of very thoughtful discussion, challenge us to think think things a little bit differently. I think your experience as both a builder, but also your experience in the state of Montana as a planning commissioner before was really invaluable. And I think that because of that, you brought a lot to the table and enriched this body. I think we came up with some really good recommendations on a lot of the stuff that we got to do over the course of your tenure. So thank you for taking the time away from your family to be here and contributing as part of a dedicated volunteer here in the city of Keizer. I think that's very important, and there's no such thing as just a little bit of volunteerism. Anybody that takes the time out of their day and their life to be in the service of their community is very valuable, and so I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, everybody. I appreciate it. You guys look forward to the good work that this body will do in the future. Thank you.
We know you're going to do great things moving forward.
Thanks. Thanks.
Okay. Well, let's see. Let's kick it into, we're running really good on the schedule right now. Let's go ahead. Anybody else want to comment? Nope. You guys are happy? Great. All right, let's go ahead and move into the walkable mixed-use climate-friendly areas presentation. Shane, razzle-dazzle us, my friend.
Guys, I didn't prepare any like canned jokes. I'm not going to juggle. I don't have my juggling balls, so there won't be a lot of razzle dazzle. So sorry to disappoint, but I just want to set the bar at the appropriate level here before we get started. Welcome to our two new planning commissioners. I got to meet you right beforehand, but we do appreciate you coming here and serving on this committee. And Rob, I will say, like, sometimes I question when you come to our meetings multiple times and then you sign up to actually be here all the time. Like, I'm like, okay, I see you. So tonight I wanted to share a little bit with you about walkable mixed use areas. I know that I've kind of mentioned this for a while now in passing. This is a project that we have been working on. We included in the packet, basically the study documentation. That's documentation that I'm going to be turning into the state. Well, it's going to be next month that we turn it in, most likely. As you know, there is some weirdness around the climate-friendly and equitable communities rulemaking that was done out of an executive order that was signed in 2020. One of the pieces that was this particular study, the rules call it climate-friendly areas. We chose to call it walkable mixed-use areas. But as you know, there's a kind of some litigation that's hanging out there. And so the rules say we've got to turn in this study by the end of the year. So we're anticipating turning in the study at the end of the year. Because if something were to change through the courts, that may change what we're doing. But assuming nothing does change, we're going to have some significant work next year that we're going to be doing to implement some of these rules. We're going to have to change some of our code sections and things like that. So I wanted to take an opportunity tonight. I felt like with the two new commissioners coming on board, like this is pretty current, and just kind of talk a little bit about what it is. It's a pretty short slide deck. I printed out for you. I think it's like 12 or 13 slides. It's pretty high level, but feel free. You can interrupt me, ask me questions. I'll try to make up answers the best I can. But yeah, we'll go from there. So bottom line, in 2022, the state adopted the climate-friendly equitable community rules, and it included a bunch of different elements to it. I know I've shared with you before, we're also starting this scenario planning project that's between the city of Keizer, Marion County, and Salem. It's like whole regionally, we're kind of looking at transportation systems, land use, and all of these things. And it's through a glass of one, being equitable to the whole community and being more inclusive as we look at plans, but also it looks at kind of transportation elements and land use patterns with a specific frame of aimed to result in a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And there's some pretty high goals that the state has set for itself. And so we're going to have to probably change some things. And so there's a whole bunch of rules, but this one is more specific to what we call designating climate-friendly areas, or planning and designating what we like to call walkable mixed-use areas. And one thing I want to say because I get this question a lot when we've talked about this study and what does this mean? And you all are keenly aware that the Planning Commission deals a lot with policies, and they deal a lot with legislative text amendments that change standards in our code that ultimately can result in different development patterns. Oftentimes in planning, and especially long-range planning or comprehensive planning, you establish a framework to allow for a certain type of development. It doesn't mean the city's developing that immediately. So I've had several questions when I've kind of shared about this with other groups of, oh, well, when will that get built? The answer is we don't totally know, because the idea is you create spaces that are more walkable and mixed use. So the idea is it would result in areas that have spaces for people to live, to work, to shop, and to play, kind of all in the same area. You know, kind of more like a downtownish feel, a little more vertical in development patterns generally, or you might have shops on the bottom, housing above, you know, gathering spaces, restaurants, all of that. And, you know, obviously the idea from a planning frame is if you provide that type of development, there's a higher likelihood that folks will live there, work there, and they won't be jumping in their car commuting 30 minutes to work every day or whatever, which taking vehicles off the road kind of speaks to that greenhouse gas piece. And, you know, one focused piece of this is in order to do that, you need places that have sidewalks and bike lanes and transit availability, things like that. The other thing in the rules, and we've talked about parking a lot, for you new gentlemen, the state, part of these rules also kind of touches on parking allowances and required parking standards. And in Keizer, we actually don't have a lot of ability to regulate parking anymore. But interestingly enough, developers keep building it because they know that their developments need it. But that is something that as we go through text amendments this next year, I expect that there will be language in our code that currently isn't there, but will be there, that basically says parking requirements, 0. So what we did with this study, and the Council of Governments actually was employed through a technical grant, I guess it was, through the state. They helped fund this work. And so the Council of Governments did the heavy lifting on the analysis piece of the study. But they came to us, I met with them, we talked about, you know, what does the city currently look like? And that was kind of like step one of, do we have areas in town that are already kind of zoned for this? And one thing that was great is because we did our Keizer revitalization plan, which was adopted way back in 2019, you know, that was a plan that we looked at River Road, our commercial core, and said, hey, what are some opportunities that we could do that could promote, frankly, this kind of development? You know, provide additional opportunities for housing and employment, things like that. So we took the approach of focusing the study on that area that we'd already designated, and, you know, all of River Road is zoned mixed use. It used to be commercial office, commercial mixed, commercial general. It was a mix of commercial uses, and we would see some residential uses mixed in with that because those were allowed in those zones. But we actually rezoned after we did the revitalization plan to make everything mixed use to kind of, I'll say, I don't know that it encourages the right word, but to allow for that type of development. And the revitalization plan was a really robust public involvement process. We had a bunch of focus groups and community meetings and little groups of business owners that came and gave us input on that. And the great news for me was that when the COGS started doing their analysis of our revitalization area that we'd already designated, and specifically the centers that we designated, we were like, oh, okay, this kind of fits with what they're doing. Yeah, there's going to be some tweaks and some changes. I've affectionately referred to the walkable mixed use areas study as kind of, if you imagine maybe a revitalization plan 2.0. It's a little more, but just to kind of call back to the revitalization plan itself, you know, a lot of it was driven not so much with a lens of greenhouse gas reduction specifically or per se, but it was more of how can we make River Road more comfortable for people to walk to stores or to park and shop, or to allow that more thriving area of activity and gathering spaces and all of those things. All the while thinking about, okay, also redevelopment can be painful, and so we don't want it to just be hard on everybody. So, one of the elements in the revitalization plan, interestingly enough, was identifying that River Road is not it right now. We don't have bike lanes in a big majority of River Road through our commercial core. We have a mix of 6-foot and 5-foot sidewalks. Some have been redone over the years. There have been some beautification, but the plan itself kind of calls for a kind of an overhaul, complete redesign of River Road. Now, when we adopted the plan, we did adopt the plan, but we didn't adopt a specific street standard as of yet. It was kind of determined at that time by the policymakers that they felt that would be more appropriate to do with a future transportation system plan update, which frankly I think is the right move. Now, we were kind of hoping we would have already done a transportation system plan update, but with these new rules that came into play and the scenario planning element that we're doing, the state has essentially said, hey, you need to do scenario planning first so that when you do a TSP update, the transportation system plan, it aligns with the preferred scenario that's been selected by the region. And so the good news, it's kind of a double-edged sword in some ways, because there's a feel that, okay, we're being forced to do things that we didn't necessarily want to do originally. But the great news from my perspective is, in going through the scenario planning process that we're embarking on, I literally just had a kickoff meeting with Salem staff and Marion County staff, I think last week or maybe the week before. We're just starting to get kind of started, and it's not quite there yet. But that process that's going to happen over the course of this next year, basically the state is committed to say, hey, when we're done with that, we're going to fund TSP updates to get these things done for you guys, to align these things. So it's kind of great, because in the past it's been a very competitive, you might wait, and TSP updates are very expensive, like a couple $100,000 expensive. And so it's one of those things where funding is going to kind of flow out of getting these things done, and it's a little bit more programmatic in how TSPs are going to be updated around the state. And that's honestly, it's going to benefit us a little bit, because we'll get to look at that. And, we've identified already things like, hey, we want better bike facilities and better sidewalk connectivity. So that's something that I'm imagining will come out of not only the scenario planning process, but a future TSP update. Sorry, that was a little bit of a rabbit trail. So kind of back to the walkable mixed use areas, there's kind of a map up here. The red lines that are drawn around, those are focused on the areas that we identified in the revitalization plan as our centers. And so in the revitalization plan, from a very high level, 10,000 foot look, we said, okay, this revitalization area it's much wider than that. It actually encompasses some residential lands and kind of all a River Road and Cherry, and kind of it bubbles out and kind of goes down some certain streets that we thought made sense. But what we said is that, okay, in these walkable mixed-use areas, there's an imagination that the densities are going to be greater as they redevelop. Buildings are going to be taller as they redevelop. And so where would it make the most sense for those things to go? And in the revitalization plan, we already kind of have a tiered scale of, if you're in a center, we actually have some different design standards for those buildings. We want buildings pulled up on the streetscape. It promotes and encourages that vertical mixed use element. In the Lock Haven Center specifically, we actually have a master planning requirement, because there's some large vacant parcels there. So we're going to make folks that want to develop those larger parcels jump through a few extra hoops of looking at things at not only the planning commission level, but the city council level before we approve something just going up in those areas. So we specifically had the council of governments look at these areas and kind of do an analysis on what kind of capacity is there for redevelopment. And if redevelopment were to happen at certain densities, can we accommodate, because the rules kind of stated you have to accommodate a certain percentage of your projected growth in these areas. I mean, the idea behind the rules was, we want cities to move towards a more compact, urbanized form, because that's going to help prevent additional sprawling, which is additional car movements. So we looked at these three areas, and what we're kind of moving forward with is the concept that we would designate these three centers as our walkable mixed use areas. They already are kind of that way, which I like. It already kind of lives in our code in a space that makes sense for us. So that's kind of the approach that we took in the study, and the results of the study aligned with that, which is great. The other piece of the study, and we'll have to do further work on this over the next year, but one of the pieces, and it kind of gets to the equity element of this, I was actually part of the Rules Advisory Committee that the state put together for this, for the whole group of climate-friendly, equitable communities rulemaking. It was a lot. And there was a lot of concern expressed from people in my profession and people in other groups, because it was a very broad Rules Advisory Committee. It was huge. There's a ton of people on it from all different interests being considered. But one of the common themes that came was, okay, if you take and you rezone a bunch of property to higher density, you know, that like dirty word gentrification comes into mind. And we've seen that around, you know, other places in the state, other places in the nation, where you displace naturally occurring affordable housing with housing that's so expensive that people get moved out of there. And so part of what we did in the study is there had to be a kind of a displacement risk assessment that was done. And it was a pretty high level, it's based on census tract information, you know, demographic, income, that kind of stuff. And the one thing, what we looked at, the map kind of shows it, the green area is basically the area that was identified as vulnerable to displacement. It wasn't there, like there's worse categories than that. But you know, the other areas really didn't have that vulnerability in them. I think there's a few reasons practically in a lot of those areas, there's not a lot of housing there currently. So you're not displacing a lot of existing housing, which was an advantage to me. And hey, if we're going to develop something new, we're not going to take Southeast Keizer or West Keizer and draw a boundary around a neighborhood and say, hey, you're now rezoned. But there is a little more housing in that Cherry Center boundary that's already there. So I think that's part of it. The other thing is the income profile in Keizer is like fairly high. You know, costs for housing are kind of high here in Keizer. And so, you know, there's a couple things that kind of naturally work to our advantage of, not that we don't have to worry about displacement, because we still do, and we need to kind of figure out how that is, but it gives us a little better option of what kind of tools we may be able to put into place to help protect against some of that displacement. And, you know, some of the things, you know, there's the state has this whole big, they call it a toolkit, because that's like one of the hot words in government these days. The toolkit. I'm like, it's a document. I don't see a wrench in here. I don't see a hammer. There's no nail guns. So I don't understand why it's a toolkit, but that's just me. But you know, things like certain zoning changes, or maybe you reduce some regulations, or you create financial incentives or tax exemptions, or the city could go in and do some land acquisition. Again, you have to kind of have a money tree to do that. You know, there's other things that you can do with displacement risk. Sometimes cities say, hey, yes, you do this, but in redevelopment, you have to provide a certain amount of affordable housing. So those are some things that we will have to look at a little higher level of detail as we get ready to adopt changes to our code. But that's kind of what the study looked at. I have a couple blow-ups. So yeah, go ahead, Rob.
I'm sorry, just real quick on that the map there, the displacement area, it goes beyond the area of the CFA. So does that mean that that whole area is at risk of displacement regardless of this?
Yeah. So that is, I mean, that's exactly what it means. It's based on, I don't know that I can explain this super awesome, but basically it's based on census tract information. And so it kind of takes into account the income profile, the costs that are there. So yeah, so that area already is like, it says it's vulnerable. And, you know, I mean, like you've seen some redevelopment in those areas where things have gone away and new things have been brought in that are probably at a higher level of rent or purchase than the original was. It's a challenge everywhere. I know I've looked at Salem's study because they just turned theirs in and it's out for comments. I just got an email about it, and like, man, they've got colors all over their maps with different categories. I think just because there's so many more people that are in their areas they're looking at. But like I said, from my perspective, I feel like there are some things that we can do to help mitigate that. And again, we're only talking about we're not talking about the whole area that we're looking at seeing things change. We're talking about a portion of it. But does that answer your question, Rob?
It does. I was trying to get at whether or not the change in this would cause the risk of displacement, or if there's already the risk.
Yeah. So I mean, I hope I answered that. I think the short answer is there's already a risk there. So the concern that we're kind of left with is there's already a risk there and we're aware of it. So with the additional changes that we propose, are we exacerbating that risk or pushing it to happen? Because that's something that we don't want to do. We want to make sure that we're able to mitigate that in some method or implement some strategies that help. You're never going to not have it happen at all, but we're wanting to make sure that we are taking those things into consideration. I mean, like, okay, this is a little bit out there, but like, one thing that theoretically I suppose the city could do is say, hey, you know what, that area is vulnerable displacement. We're not going to do anything in that area. We're not going to make any changes at all. We're just going to like not even touch it. I don't think that's a great option, especially because we have to do this study and we have to designate areas. So it's probably better there than nowhere, and that's my opinion. But you know, that's why we're going to go through public processes and have hearings this next year. But yeah, it's not. The study work that was done didn't say, hey, if all these changes happen, then it happens. It's that, no, there's already the potential for that to happen in that area. So you need to be extra careful in that area, I guess does that make sense more?
It does, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so just kind of wanted to walk through kind of the little bit of a blow up of the centers themselves so we understand what we're talking about. This is the Lock Haven Center. So basically, you know, from Lock Haven and River includes Wearmart, it basically includes properties. And this is where go ahead, Commissioner Burson.
So I'm just curious, like, how we drew these lines, because I'm looking at this line. So we brought in the mobile home park by Lock Haven, but we left out Inland Shores, which there's a little bit of development land over here by Salem Clinic, maybe, but why would we leave that out? I mean, they actually have walking paths around the lake, and
Sure.
you know, I mean, it seems like they should be part of it, or I mean, because it feels like to me this is there's some income base going on here.
No, it really isn't. So honestly, the lines that we drew, we didn't create. They're straight from the revitalization plan. Now, if you go back to 2018 and 19, when we drew the lines for the centers in the revitalization plan, the reason that area around Inland Shores was left out is that it's all really new development. So the likelihood of those things redeveloping anytime in the next 40 or 50 years is really low, where we've seen some other areas that have redeveloped. So that's kind of why it was drawn in that way. So we didn't create the boundary for this study. This boundary was created through the revitalization plan back in 2018 and 19.
Are we restricted then to those boundaries in the revitalization plan? Because
No,
like you said,
we aren't. I mean,
you could say, okay, it'd be easy to displace the people in the manufactured home park here, less so than people in Inland Shores, you know, because you say those are newer places,
Right.
but there is develop land that you can develop
right.
inside of some of these areas that's left out along River Road here.
Yeah. No, and that's absolutely true. And again, we designate the walkable mixed-use area, but we don't necessarily change the zone. So like in this case, the manufactured home park specifically is zoned RM. It's not zone mixed use. It was identified in the revitalization plan that maybe that if somebody as an owner wanted to rezone that in the future, it would make sense because it's right on River Road and Lock Haven. But there was also concerns and things identified in the revitalization plan of, hey, that's some kind of more naturally occurring, it's not affordable housing, but it's maybe more affordable than other housing. So if there's any kind of rezones in the future, that's something that needs to be considered. So that's, the area calculations on where and how many people would fit in the different areas based on the population numbers that we had to use. That's actually broken down in that study material. So the RM is a little different than the mixed use part.
But this, I'm sorry to keep asking questions, but
No, it's fine.
so this walkable area it's not just housing though, because you're looking
Correct.
at, can I walk to the grocery store? Can
Absolutely.
I walk to the post office? Can I
Yep.
walk to, businesses also,
Yes.
the doctor's office here?
Yes.
Things like that. And so I guess what I'm asking is next year when we actually talk about doing this, I understand you got to put a plan in now. Can these borders be talked about and
They could be, yeah.
changed?
Yeah. No, I mean, what the rules say, I've got to submit the study, which is kind of what we're doing. If we were to choose to move lines around, and we'd have to do some more work and make sure that we're not taking land away. Expanding the borders wouldn't be hard to do. Shrinking them would be hard to do. But yeah, I mean, that definitely, the borders could be talked about for the walkable mixed-use areas.
I mean, this development, it seemed like the planning from the beginning of it was almost like this,
It is.
It's
No,
a
it is.
walkable,
Yep.
mixed-use area.
No, it
that we
absolutely-
created around a gravel pit,
Yeah, no, it
So-
absolutely is. That whole side of Inland Shores is zone mixed use. Like it is, I mean, and we had, before the revitalization plan, we had a plan called the McNary Activity Center Plan, which was basically everything north of Lock Haven on both sides of River Road going up to the Courthouse Athletic Club, and that side of the lake that's been designated mixed use since I think 1996. So that had always been imagined that it would develop in more of this style of development pattern. I think the key is that when you think about some of the mixed use around the lake, it's a lot lower density. I would call that like mixed use light in the planning world, like very light. Whereas like your kind of classic mixed use of today are things that are much more vertically constructed. And, maybe no parking lots because maybe there's a parking garage, or maybe it's on a mass transit line or on a light rail line. That's a lot of times where you see mixed use developments happen. So, yeah, so that's where, like I said, we approached it from, we have an established boundary that the city has adopted and been moving forward with a certain set of design standards in these centers. And so let's look at those centers because, well, for lack of a better way of saying it, change is always hard for communities. The amount of phone calls I get from folks that are upset about development happening that has been outright allowed for decades, but because something has changed and now the market has realized, oh, this is going to happen now, they feel that the city's made big changes to their plans. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily the case. And so one of the things I personally wanted to avoid was taking and saying, hey, we're going to go ahead and just plop down this new area and completely reinvent the wheel. So that's kind of why we stuck with those boundaries, but I think that's a fair question. I mean, I think we could definitely look at that when we get to that adoption phase.
So the last question I have real
Sure.
quick is the farm that is along Lock Haven, the grass seed farm.
Yep.
They're still able to farm that land.
Oh, sure.
Even inside of this
Yeah.
this new,
Yeah, I mean, they've been farming that land forever. They still are. That property hasn't been
mixed use
zoned.
allows them
That
to
zone,
also
property's
farm.
not been zoned farmland since I've probably been alive.
Okay.
Like, it was never zoned farmland. That's not something that's in the city. But it's a use that's established, so it kind of falls under that pre-existing non-conforming use of the land, so they can keep doing that forever.
Okay.
That property is also, one that's identified in our current transportation system plan as having a road bisecting it and connecting out to River Road. And so that's something that, we've talked with the family there a couple different times over the years. In fact, the owner he came to some of our revitalization plan meetings when we were creating the revitalization plan. And, you know, that property in my mind would be a prime example of one that right now it's zoned medium density. If they ever decide they want to actually do something with it and develop it, they may want to rezone that to mixed use to give them more flexibility. But again, the plan kind of sets the framework for allowances. It doesn't necessarily mean anything changes immediately.
So they can continue to use the land
Yep.
as they're using it now underneath
Yeah.
this new designation.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Sure. So anyway, so this is our, like I said, this is our Lock Haven Center. You know, the map kind of shows some bus stops where we do have some actual bike lane area in that section of River Road, albeit they're not what you call the most comfortable bike lanes to ride on, as far as they have like this bike level stress analysis that they do for cyclists. So, you know, maybe if you're a pretty aggressive cyclist that wears the spandex, you probably ride it and don't worry about it. But if you're maybe like me, where you ride a bike for fun, you're like, I don't want to get hit by a car. So, you know, this is an area where, again, with River Road eventually maybe looking different than it does today, the idea is to figure out how and when and if things develop in this space, how are people going to get in and out of there in a more efficient way and more multimodal way. So that's our space there. And like I said, in this area, we have that provision where larger parcels, I think it's 4 acres is the cap, if I remember right. Anything 4 acres or larger requires them to go through a master planning process so we can actually look at how are they massing buildings and putting the uses, and what kind of mix of uses are they providing in those areas. All right, so our Shamawa Center, this is kind of right around Shamawa River Road. And obviously you kind of see, you know, you've got Safeway, you've got, well, it's not Schoolhouse, I guess it's still technically Schoolhouse Square, but, you know, you have that area that is a lot of commercial development, although down Churchdale and Elizabeth, that does capture some area that has, you know, some different housing types. This is the area, but again, you have a couple different zonings within the area. So having a plan like this, while we designate the walkable mixed-use areas, there's still nuances and implementation based on the underlying zone and what's allowed there. So yeah, so that's kind of what we looked at for that area. Obviously, there's some space that kind of lends itself to go, oh, okay, yeah, maybe with redevelopment down the road, you could see some greater density or some additional buildings, taking away parking lots at some point. I don't know, that's possible. Or maybe things go more vertical. But it is difficult, because one of the things we also saw with the revitalization plan is much of the properties along River Road, they are still basically bringing in a high enough value that a lot of times with redevelopment, it's because something has been depressed enough in value, or it's become blighted, or, you know, kind of at its end of life. So when somebody looks and goes, all right, what's my return on investment look like? It may make more sense to pump a whole bunch of money into a property, because you'll make a whole bunch of money in the end of it. And right now, that's a challenge on a lot of River Road, because frankly, a lot of our stuff is pretty nice and functions quite well for the owners. So it's, again, there's a difference of what's there and what's going to happen in the next couple years versus planning for future capabilities and possibilities, really. So, so this is our Cherry Center. It's, you know, pretty big. It involves quite a bit of area there. And that's, again, this is an area that there's bike lanes on Cherry, but there's nothing on River Road. And how do you connect folks? And, you know, I think it's interesting, because for me personally, a study like this is hard, because we crunch numbers based on what's the possibility, but we don't really get to say what's the probability. And so that's something that is a little hard, but we are required by the rules to plan for it, to look at the possibilities, and to make changes that would align with that. So here's a little kind of timeline of where we're at. There's the we are here. We've done the initial analysis, looked at the potential areas. We've gone out and talked about this with different groups. By the end of this year, we need to publish our study. And then next year was when we will actually be drafting and proposing officially to adopt the areas and designate them and provide some zoning code changes that will align some of those things. I actually just heard, which I was really encouraged, COG, who did a lot of our initial work, I believe we're going to get them on board. The state's going to hire them essentially to kind of be our consultants and help us draft code language. One of the things in the study work that was kind of we did a high level kind of audit of, hey, here's what our code says currently, because frankly, if we'd done a little bit more with the revitalization plan, I would be glossing over this a lot more because I'd be like, hey, we already did it, but we were pretty close. So like one example, I'll just point out like a couple examples. Now the parking, that's a little different animal. We would have never imagined saying no parking requirements, but that already kind of got taken out of our wheelhouse because we have transit up and down River Road. But like one of the big things is that density. Density needs to be increased a little bit in these areas from what we allow right now. However, when you look at our code and the way it's structured and the nuance of it is we'll have a density number, but then we already have some allowances for exceptions when you're going with vertical mixed use development. And so the change of what's allowable versus what will be allowable is really negligible. One other kind of key element, when we did the revitalization plan, we ended up capping building heights in Keizer and along River Road at 50 feet. It's been a long-held building height. Like I've worked here for 26 years. There's always been a max height of 50 feet. That's never increased that I'm aware of for commercial projects. Like it's always been that way as long as I have known the development code. Now, if you ask me how many buildings are 50 feet in Keizer, I would tell you that many. Like we've not seen that kind of construction because generally when you go above 3 stories, you get into concrete and steel, prices go way up in cost. And so sometimes if you go higher than 3 stories, well, you might as well do 10. And so that's one of the elements that in the rules, we will be required to increase our building height from 50 feet up to 60 feet. So we don't have to go higher than that. There are some cities around the state who are choosing to say, you know what, no height limits. Let the market drive it, build as tall as you want in these areas. And that'll be probably an option for Planning Commission to consider. But we will have some parameters, and that's the intent is that as I work with the COG to, Council of Government, sorry, I don't know if I said that, but as I work with the Council of Government folks that are going to help us draft our actual amendments to be consistent with the state rules, I am imagining that we will come to this body for our public hearings with rules that represent what the requirements are, not something hugely off the wall that's way out of left field. So that's kind of that's just like a couple of examples. There's also some rules in there about, parking lot, landscaping. We already have those rules. It's going to require some changes, but I don't know that there will be a lot of significance, frankly, to developers or to property owners. But that's something that we have to kind of do. I don't know them off the top of my head, but there are some pretty prescriptive things about, how many trees and all of that. We already require that in our parking lot areas, but I think it may have to be beefed up in these areas. And the idea is that when you get greater density and greater building footprints and more impervious surface, you need to offset that with higher quality landscaping elements and things like that, because there's, like environmental, there's good things with trees. They help us. So anyway, so this is kind of where we're at with it right now and kind of why I really wanted to give you an overview. As I said, it wasn't going to be super long. I kept my word for the most part, right? But I would be happy to entertain any questions you might have and try to answer those the best you could. But the biggest thing is I wanted to make you more educated and more aware of where we're at and where we're heading in this next year. So, thank you.
Anybody have any other questions? Yeah.
So is this technically going to be a new zone, or will it be an overlay zone of what already exists?
Yeah, so the way with the code audit piece that's in that like super long, I mean, I gave you that stuff just in case you want to like, go planner geek out a little bit and dig through it all. So, and if you don't, I'll give you the high level overview. Basically, in the code audit, what we looked at is, I'm pretty familiar with our development code. Like I might be like the most familiar with our development code of just about anybody in the city of Keizer. So I've been here for so long. When I looked at the rules, when I looked at kind of the standards, and then when we started getting results of what our capacity was like, because I had this fear that I was like, oh man, are we going to have to rezone a huge portion of town to make this work? And then when we crunched the numbers, when Council of Governments crunched the numbers, they said, actually, we're in pretty good shape. The work you guys already did was good work looking at these kind of possibilities. I was encouraged. But then I kind of started to think about it strategically on, okay, how much changes are we going to have? And honestly, Rob, what I'm imagining, and I don't know yet, and this is why I'm really glad that the Council of Governments is going to help me craft the development code language. My desire is to embed these new rules, because we already did a lot of stuff that checked 80 to 90% of the boxes that the state made rules for in 2022. We'd already done the work. We were being proactive for different reasons, but we were still being proactive back in 2018 when we adopted our River Cherry Overlay District. So and that's one of the reasons, kind of going back to Commissioner Burson's question on the boundaries and exactly what we looked at. My desire was to look at it and go, hey, this overlay district boundary for the River Cherry Overlay District, it already exists. It's already in my code in its own specific section. And within that section of code, it has standards for if a property is zoned mixed use or it's zoned residential medium density. And if a property is within one of the centers, there's a layer of rules and requirements and allowances that you have in those centers that is greater, it already allows greater density than the rest of the River Cherry Overlay District, than the rest of the city of Keizer. And so what I am envisioning would happen, and I don't know if it will be this simple, like, I don't know, I live a pretty good life, but I'm not sure if I'm living that good, if I can get that blessed. But my hope is that we would be able to bring amendments to simply that section of the code that already is connected to the centers. So right now in those centers, I have a density number. And so it'll be tweaking that density number and increasing it a little bit. We have a building height number. We increase that building height, but it's only for those centers themselves. So I don't think it will have to be a full-on new zone. I don't think it will have to be, excuse me, I don't think it will have to be zone changes. Like I'm not anticipating that. I'm really anticipating it's going to be a little bit more of a surgical tweaking of what we already have to increase what we're allowing. So that's my hope, like with the fingers crossed, so. But it's a great question.
Keep going.
Sorry, I have one more. I was reading in, I don't know if you're ready to answer this or not, but I was reading in the OAR, it talked about the 2.0 floor area ratio.
Yes.
Do you know if that's relative to building footprint, or if that's supposed to be relative to the site or the site area?
So I don't know that there is specificity in that. I think that you have some flexibility of how you apply that standard. That is actually one of the questions I also have. If it has to be every single building, or if it's, if you're doing this and this, can it be more horizontally calculated? I don't know that off the top of my head. So I know that we have some language that's similar, that's already in our code regarding the centers, specifically in that north area where we have some percentages outlined of you can't just build everything residential, so you have to have kind of like you can't exceed a certain cap. But we have allowances where it can be spread out over an entire site. So if somebody wanted to mass commercial here and residential here, you would calculate it as a whole. But yeah, the OARs have some specific language in there, and so yeah, I'm not 100% positive on that yet.
Surprisingly, it was a little bit ambiguous.
I have no comment. Yeah, no, and honestly, I think that's one of the challenges with this rules process was very involved, and there's a lot of rules that came out that local jurisdictions have been nervous about, and like, what exactly is this going to mean for us? And again, for us, like where the rubber really meets the road, and I always kind of say like, hey, there's one thing with a plan or a comprehensive plan that's like this guiding document. The implementation piece of that is the development code. So it's really that standard that we adopt that's the regulatory. That's what I review a building permit for. I don't get the luxury of saying, hey, you know, in the River Cherry area, we kind of want a better street. So you want to do an addition to your business? Hey, rebuild the whole street. I can't do that. Like, that's not a thing that I can do. Sometimes I can, but it has to be pretty significant. So yeah. Yeah, no problem.
Is that it? Anybody else? Yeah.
When it comes to bettering public transportation, how would we go about that if the public transportation is so integrated with Salem's?
Yeah, so with the scenario planning work that we're about to start with, Chariots is a part of that as well. They're going to have representation on the advisory committee, which will also include elected officials from all the jurisdictions. Because I mean, honestly, that is it's a huge piece when you look at the state's goals for cities to reduce greenhouse gases. You know, in an area like Keizer where we're essentially built out, like we don't have a bunch of land that we can develop in a different pattern that's already there. So we have a responsibility that as things redevelop, we promote a compact urbanized pattern, sure, but to really make a difference on getting people out of cars and into alternate modes, transit, you're right, is a huge linchpin, and it's got to be a huge lever and an element that gets looked at with that. Obviously, one of the challenges is with a transit district that serves the whole area, and it's their own entity, and we, the city, don't provide transit service. It is definitely has to be a collaborative kind of look. And so that's, I guess what I can say is from a planning perspective, we're involving the people so that does get looked at. From a boots on the ground, how does that work part? Time will tell, I think, realistically. So, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately if the transit district had unlimited funding, they would be all for like, yeah, let's have rapid transit line that serves and do great stuff. But like anything, it's like, what's their ridership look like? What does their budget look like? What is their capacity? So.
And then also, sorry, for a business like Safeway, since you can't tell them to fully like redevelop their whole property, how would we go about that? Would we minimize their parking space and include more trees, or would it be adding?
Yeah, so I mean, so it would be developer driven, right? So like we would, when we change our rules, because even like the revitalization plan, we adopted it like 4 years ago, and we haven't seen a ton of redevelopment on River Road in the last 4 years. And even some of the development we've seen on River Road, people have equated that to being, oh, that's that revitalization plan. And I'm like, oh, no, it's like they could have done that 15 years ago if they wanted to. Like for example, the apartments on River Road right now that are going up north of Lock Haven, that has been zoned and allowed to be developed the way it's being developed for as long as I've worked here. It just never happened until now. It didn't actually happen because of the revitalization plan. We didn't create like financial incentives, but that would be some of the levers that a city could choose to do. Now, will this city choose to do it? Does the city have the capacity to do it? You could regulate things to require redevelopment to happen at a certain clip, which would basically say, hey, either stay the way you are, or when you go to change, you got to change to this. Or sometimes cities will try to incentivize those things and say, if you build this type of development, maybe there's tax abatements, maybe there's SDC credits that you can give, things like that. Those are some of the pieces that will be, at least need to be considered. But, you know, historically, it's been more of an approach of let's make allowances and then allow the market and the private property owners to decide what works best for them and what they want. So, does that help answer that? Okay. Any others? All right. I know that was super fun, but thank you. And like I said, I wanted to take an opportunity to make sure I caught you all up to speed on where we were at with this specific project, because there is more to come in the future. So.
No, this was good. Thank you, Shane.
Yeah.
And you're actually up next. Staff report.
Oh, staff report.
Don't go anywhere.
I always forget that part in there. Okay, so I did have a few things. I'll just stay right here. It would be weird to get up and move over there. So I just had a few things that I kind of wanted to give some heads up on. You know, I know that some of you may have had questions. We do have a few projects that are getting closer to finalization. We've got the Verta apartments. That's been a pretty hot topic in the community. I field calls and questions on that pretty often. Actually, I just heard today from Tammy that it sounds like they're actually looking at maybe the end of this month trying to start getting people in there, which was news to me. I haven't heard that yet. So we'll see if that happens. I mean, obviously they need to make sure they get some things done. I haven't been called out to do any kind of inspections yet I saw they started getting landscaping in. I know they'll probably want to try to get partially opened, but it's like fire district, building officials, public works. There's a lot of hoops still, but that is getting, I think we can all see that one's getting closer to being complete than just getting started at this point in the stage. I just mentioned the apartments on River Road. They're continuing to move forward. I know I've received some calls and concerns about that, and I try to educate people the best I can. But again, that's one of those examples of the market factors were right and a property was for sale, or however that happened. The developer picked up that property and they developed it with an allowed use. It wasn't something that this commission or this individual made any exceptions or variances to. It's just outright allowed. But that one is kind of moving right along. The scenario planning, I kind of already gave you an update that was on my list, but I kind of gave you an update in the presentation. We had a kickoff meeting. We're kind of getting that process rolling. That's us working with Salem, Marion County, ODOT, transit folks to come up with a preferred scenario for our region. Now, the other thing I was going to let you know, I know I had an inquiry. Myself and the public works director are going to go to the traffic safety bike PED committee next week and chat with them. It sounded like there was some concern at the traffic safety committee meeting regarding planning and some things and how things work. So I'm going to get to go and chat with them and do some Q&A and educate them a little bit. But I think there's a desire from their end that they want to be a little more involved with some of the planning elements. So I'll keep you posted on that. I mean, I don't know what that looks like moving forward, but we'll have that conversation with them. And then the last thing I wanted to kind of give you guys a heads up on is next month's meeting. We are going to be having a meeting. We can't cancel it because you're going to be hearing an appeal. So we have a little land use case. We received an appeal, and because it's just a partition, but it's a partition with a major variance for a setback, and because of that major variance, the appeal actually comes to Planning Commission. So I know not all of you, but I know part of you were here at last month's meeting with Shannon's robust and entertaining training on things like ex parte contact and bias and things like that. So I wanted to kind of give you a heads up. You are going to be hearing an appeal, more information to come. It will be a public hearing, however. It's for a property on Dearborn. So if people want to bend your ear and talk about an appeal, probably best to say, time out. I'm a decision-making body on this thing. So anyway, so that'll be exciting. I've never come to planning commission with appeal because in 26 years of doing work here, none of the decisions I've ever written have been appealed. This is the first. So I don't know. Anyway, but so yeah, that was kind of the last one. Just kind of wanted to give you a heads up on that. This one, so it'll be a little different packet-wise because with an appeal and a public hearing, there's notice requirements. And the staff, I will be making a staff recommendation to the planning commission on the merits of the appeal. And I know Shannon will be very involved because there's rules about how we run the meeting. It'll have to be a little more formal than it is like normally. We're pretty
Don't look at me, that's Matt's problem.
We're pretty laid back. Yeah, you better hope he's here, otherwise it'll be your problem. But so anyway, I just kind of wanted to give you guys a heads up on that. So I know, like I said, I know at last month's meeting, we were like, yeah, we don't need to get into that quasi-judicial world too much. And then immediately I followed up with going like, hey, too bad, we're going to have a quasi-judicial hearing. But all that to say, it will be a fun learning experience for all of us. So, and I think I left, oh no, they're right there. Yeah, okay, that was the last thing. That was the last thing on my list. Thank
I'm
you.
excited now.
All right.
It's gonna be fun. Okay, council liaison report. Counselor.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So, going back to, what is this, Lock Haven. So we know River Road's all mixed use, but Trail between, between Lock Haven and Harmony, you know, it's houses on the left-hand side,
Yeah.
field on the right-hand side.
The west side is zone mixed use.
So all the west side is still mixed use, so that new, like somebody bought an older home in there, they've knocked that home down, and
Yep.
boy, once they peel the trees out, it goes quite a ways back in there
Yep.
by the little Grange Hall, dance hall place.
Ron, that was the other one on my list that I did, I
But that's also mixed use, so.
that is,
that's
so
more part-
that's the other one I wanted to give you a heads up on because that, we got a lot of concern when the trees started coming down, which was sad.
Well, they were
Like, I mean,
cotton.
I won't.
But there was a big oak tree in the front.
It was, that oak was huge. Unfortunately, that oak was in conflict with frontage improvements that have to go in and public utilities. So there wasn't, I mean, I think Public Works and the engineers actually looked at, is there a way to save it? And there really wasn't.
Yeah, the
But
house
that
is
is
pretty-
one that I didn't mention in my update, and I'm sorry because I wrote it down and then I looked at my list and I thought I said it, but now that you said it, I realized I did not say that one. So that one is a apartment complex that's proposed there. I believe it's 35 units, 36 units, something like that. It's in the 30s. And that one is on a piece of property that, yeah, that area, the whole west side has been zoned mixed use for, again, as long as I can remember. I mean, I think it was in 96, because that's part of that McNary Activity Center area. So we got a lot of angst with the trees coming down and a lot of concern and why didn't we get notice and all of those kinds of things. And it's valid, like I get it. But the reality is that the property owner there is developing something that's a allowed use in the zone. So that one is, I don't know that permits have been fully issued on that for the buildings, but they do have the erosion control permit, and I received the tree removal and replacement plan and landscaping plans that I've reviewed. So
Did you ever get a permit to just, like, to raise the house? Like,
yeah, yep. So they've done everything that they're supposed to do, but it is hard because it's one of those where it'd be like if somebody's constructing a home on a lot, we don't give notice to neighbors for that. But I wanted to let you all know that that was happening if you hadn't already heard it, or if you get your ear bent, say, hey, why are you guys allowing this? You can, with a straight face, say, hey, we didn't allow that. That's all Shane's fault. Just send him my way.
Well, I just ride my bike to the courthouse that way, and it really surprised me once I got the trees out, just how far back.
Yeah, it's
it
a
goes.
bigger
I mean,
piece than you imagine.
You thought it was just this little
Yeah.
old house up front. and-
No, I mean, the site
It's-
is large
it's-
enough. I mean, they're going to have 3 separate buildings with,
It's,
I think that might be 12 units each. So maybe it's a 36 units.
so anyway,
33, okay. So one's a little bit smaller than the others, but yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay.
Anything else for Shane? Okay. We've got no council report tonight because Councilor Durano's gone. Youth committee report.
I am so sorry. I didn't know I was supposed to report, so I'm not sure what.
Yeah,
Oh,
literally
okay.
say whatever you want.
I'm sorry, usually during the city council meetings, I would update them on McNary activities, but because it's like the planning committee, I'm not sure what to update, but.
That's cool. It's all good. Oh, apparently I'm up for the council representation. I signed up for all the wrong things this time. And anything else? Okay, in that case, we are adjourned at, I can't see, the light is weird. 7:12. Thank you, guys. Yeah, I hit the thing. Yay. I was like, I can't reach that far.
You guys will make that, you will actually make a decision. This is.
I am out of town next meeting.
You have had a conversation.
Literally the entire reason I go on this thing. And I have to be in Washington DC.
Somebody appeals.
Yeah, no, on the